Have you ever wanted to know how to build a beautiful carousel like this one with such a nice scrolling experience? Then you are watching the right video, because in this video we will be creating this awesome carousel from scratch using ReactJS, React 3 Fiber and GSAP. But not only this, we will also do some shader programming, which allows us to create these awesome effects here. You see we have a nice parallax effect. Then also we have a nice deformity effect based on the scroll direction and the scroll speed. We bend our items, we deform them. And then also we have a nice little floating animation. And all of this is achieved by shader programming. Shaders are small programs that run on our GPU, and they allow us to create highly efficient effects such as these animations here. And all of this will be done in this tutorial, but we are still not done. Now let's see what's happening when clicking on an item. We have this cool wave animation and then also some HTML here. I think this is pretty cool, and all of this will be created in this tutorial. So I would say, without further ado, let's get started. Alright, now let's get started to build our beautiful, awesome carousel. For this, you can grab this line here. Since I'm using bun, though, my command will be a bit different, but you can use npx. Let's go to our CMD, and here let's type bun empty space x, put in our command, create next app at latest, hit enter, name is 3 carousel, and I already have a folder named like this, so let's name it 3 carousel 2. TypeScript, yes. ESLint, yes. Tailwind, yes. Source directory, no. App router, yes. TurboPack, yes. Customize the import aliases, no. Okay, now that we are done, let's cd into our directory. Let's type code, empty space dot. And this will bring up our project in Visual Studio Code. Now let's go into the terminal here, and we need to install a bunch of dependencies. So let's do that. Bun x I. So what do we need? We need 3. We need a specific version of React 3 Fiber, otherwise we will get an error. And the reason is we are using the latest Next.js, which is Next.js 15, and there are some bugs. So it's not really compatible with all versions of Next.js. But in the future they will fix it probably. But for now we need to use add React 3 dash fiber and then add alpha. Like so. Then also we need GSAP for our animations. And then we need dat.gui and add types /dat.gui. And that should be it. Let's hit enter. Now let's do bunx run dev. Alright, and here we have our starter project. Now let's make sure to go to app, and then let's go to the page. And here we have a bunch of stuff that we don't need. We don't need this image component. And we basically can get rid of everything in here. And maybe we can even get rid of all these classes. And we just need w-screen and h-screen. Now let's try out if we can get React 3 Fiber to work. So in here, let's import the canvas component from React 3 Fiber. And currently I don't see it here. So let's import it. And above let's use client because we are in Next.js, otherwise it won't work. And now here we have our canvas component, and in here let's have a mesh, and then in here a box geometry and a mesh standard material with a color of hot pink, like so, and it's already working. But you see, currently this is just black because we don't have any light, and we need light to interact with our standard material in order for us to see all the details such as color. So we could bring in an ambient light like so, and then it's already working. Okay, one important thing though, in this tutorial we will not work with light, simply because it's way too complicated when using light with custom shader material, because we would need to write extra code or include code from ThreeJS so that our items, our 3D objects are able to interact with light. And this would make this tutorial way too long and stuff like this. So we don't do that in this tutorial, but just that you know, you can use light with mesh standard material out of the box, but not with the shader material and custom shaders. All right. Nice. So that our React 3 Fiber is working perfectly, we can do another thing. I will simply delete this public folder here and grab one public folder from here, and I copy the folder. And in here you'll see I have a bunch of beautiful images. What we will be doing now is we will start creating a folder underneath app. We name it components. And in here we will have a file named settings.ts. And since you cannot really learn anything from writing it by your own, I would advise you to simply copy and paste it. But I will quickly go over everything here. So currently you just see one object here, but in the future we will have a couple of objects, as you can see here. Yeah, and each object has a width and a height. Yeah, so the plane settings are for each plane here. Then we have an item gap, which is the space between these planes. Yeah, you can also control it here, like so. Then also we will have some values for the rotation, x, y, z, an array of numbers, yeah, 3-dimensional, and also for the position. And these have default and active values, and default is what you see here now, and active is this here, yeah? So they have different rotation and position, as you can see here. And then of course we have an array with paths to our images. That's all we have here. So what we are gonna do next is we create another component, carousel.tsx. We do RFCE. So we have our carousel boilerplate, and I can simply create this boilerplate with RFCE because I have an extension named React Snippets for Visual Studio Code. Now let's create another component. This will be a child component of carousel, and we name it carousel item.tsx RFCE. And in here, we will have a group, and then we will have a mesh in here. And in that mesh, we will have a plane geometry. Oops, and this must be self-closing, like so. And we will have our shader material. And in a bit, we will pass our custom vertex shader and fragment shader to this shader material. But for now, we are fine. And here you see that I'm using a React 3 Fiber group tag. And I think we would not really need this component, but It would be useful if we had not just a mesh here, but also other React 3 fiber components. Yeah, but currently we only have this thing here, so we would not really need this. But because I changed some code in the past and I had it here, and now it's easier for me to keep it. But you will see that this is not really necessary. But otherwise, I would need to change a lot of code in the carousel component. But I will explain it a bit more as we go on with this tutorial. So don't get confused here. It's not really necessary, this component here. So far, so good. Now let's go back to our carousel. And in here, let's bring in our carousel item. Like so. And now let's go to our page. And let's bring in our carousel. And we can get rid of all this inside the canvas. And let's bring in our carousel, like so. And you'll see something, yeah? Not much, but a bit. And this is our carousel item. And by default, this shader material displays something, but we will write our own custom shaders so we get these cool effects here, yeah? So that we are able to display a texture, which is our image, yeah, and also that we are able, and also that we can show some nice effects, such as parallax or deformity, yeah, when scrolling up or down. All right, now, next, let's go back to our carousel component. And in here, let's create our textures, which will be our images from the public folder. Let's do const textures is equal to images, which we bring in from our settings file, yeah. And then we do map. We access each image. And we make use of use texture. Oops, and I forgot to install another package. So let's do it, very important. Bunx install add React 3-dry. Yeah, dry. This is a helper package for React 3 fiber. And then we should be able to bring in use texture. Yeah. Currently, I'm not able to. But you should be able to bring in use texture from React 3-dry. And here we pass in the image, like so. Now let's go back to our carousel item. Let's create an interface. Carousel item props. And first of all, we want to pass as props the index of type number, and then also a texture of type. Let me bring in import everything as 3 from 3. And then we can say here 3. Do we have a type for this? Yeah, I think so. 3 texture, like so. And then here we can destructure the props, index texture, and then we specify carousel item props. And for now we are fine, but later we have to pass down this texture to our shader material. This is important, but for now, let's keep it like this. Now let's go back to our carousel. Let's grab this carousel item, Control X, and let's provide curly brackets. And in here, let's map our textures. And let's pass down the texture and the index to our carousel item. And of course, the problem here is we need to put a group tag around it, yeah, because we can only have one thing in here. And here I must get rid of this thing here. But now you see that we still see one object here, and the reason is they all have the same position, yeah? So let's work on this. And now let's write some code that runs every single frame, meaning like 60 or 120 times per second. And for this, we can use a hook called useFrame. Let's bring it in from React 3 fiber. And now in here, we want to do some calculations. What we want to do is we want to calculate the distance the Y value, the Z value, and also a scale value. And the reason is, you see that the center object here has a scaling effect. It scales a bit. And also you see that the outer objects here have some kind of gray scale effect. And they scale down a bit. Yeah. And in order to do this, in order to have this nice effect, we need to calculate the distance. And distance means, in our case, it calculates the distance from the center. And the object in the center has a distance of 0, while the other ones, like this top one or bottom one, have a distance of 1. Yeah, this is important. So let's get started. But before we are able to calculate the distance and so on, we need to create a few more variables. Yeah, maybe let's do that now. First of all, let's create some refs. A root group ref is equal to use ref from React. And then this is of type 3.group, like so. And we have to bring in import everything as 3 from 3. And here, let's say or null, like so. And let's pass in null. Then let's bring in the viewport. We will need that later. From use 3, which comes from React 3 Fiber. Let's also access all the items, and we get them via root group ref dot current question mark dot children. Then let's also calculate the total items, which is items dot length. Yeah, maybe let's create a few more refs. I do it below this ref here, so it's nice to see. So what else do we need? We need a progress ref. Progress ref is equal to use ref. And by default, it's 0. We need a previous progress ref, which is also 0 by default. And the reason why we are using a bunch of refs here is they are simply more performant. We can manipulate these refs without causing the component to re-render. And with a lot of frequent updates of these variables here, the performance may be suffering. So we are using refs. It doesn't cause the component to re-render, and it's very performant and goes well with React 3 Fiber and this use frame hook. Yeah, so this is the case. So this is why we use refs. We could also experiment in using use state here. You could try that and see how the performance may suffer. But here, this worked well with refs, so we will use them here as well. And now let's write some code in use frame. First of all, let's say const raw progress is equal to progress ref dot current. Then we can calculate the scroll speed, which is equal to raw progress minus ref progress ref dot current. So based on this scroll speed, we will be able to animate these objects based on the scroll direction and speed. Yeah, so you see a nice subtle deformity effect here, and this will be achieved by the scroll speed. Let's update our scroll speed ref. Scroll speed ref dot current is equal to scroll speed. And oops, I forgot to define the scroll speed ref. So let's do it above here. Yes, const scroll speed ref is equal to use ref, and by default it's 0. And then also we need to update our pref progress ref dot current, which is equal to raw progress. And since this is updating every frame, we will get these beautiful smooth animations. Yeah, let's create another variable, progress, and this progress value will be equal to mass.max. We pass in 0, mass.min and then 100, raw progress, like so. And what this does is, yeah, it clamps the progress between 0 and 100 because we don't want to go any further than 100 and we don't want to go lower than 0. Yeah, so this is what this does. Now let's calculate the center index and distances. For that, let's say const fraction is equal to progress divided by 100 times total items. And here you see it may be undefined. So what we do here is we say exclamation mark like so, or maybe let's say quotation mark and then pike operator here 2 times and then 0 like so. Yeah. So if it's undefined, then we choose 0 here. We want to make sure that we have a nice snappy experience, as you can see here, that it snaps a bit. Yeah, you always see we have one center item and then one item above and below. Yeah, this looks really nice. And to achieve this, we need to create the center index, which is equal to mass. Yeah, and here you can use mass.floor or mass.round. It's not that important. It's a slight difference. I think using mass.round makes it a bit more smooth, but this will create a nice snappy experience. All right, now let's bring in GSAP. Import GSAP from GSAP. Let's loop over our items for each. In here, we have access to our item and index. And you know what? I don't like that this is either this type or undefined. So what I do is I change it a bit. So here, const item is equal to this or an empty array, like so. And now in here, let's create our distance value, which is equal to index minus center index. And now let's understand why we need center index and then the distance. So for example, this object here has an index of 1 because it is the second item. And the center index is 1 as well. So the distance will be 0. Okay, now let's look at this example here. Yeah, the object below the centered object. And here we see that the index is 2 because it's the third item here. But the center index is 1, yeah, because this is a currently centered object which has an index of 1. So 2 minus 1 is a distance of 1. And this is important so that we can make sure that these are scaled down and that these are also a bit grayish, so to speak. Yeah. So this is important. So this is why we need this distance value here, but you will see it in a bit in action. Now we also need this distance value to calculate our y value, because currently they all have the same y value. This is why we just see one object here. So let's work on this now. So we say const y is equal to, and here we use distance times, and then settings.height. Let's bring in settings. And you know what? Sorry, maybe we should work on something else now before we keep going. Yeah, I would think that makes sense. Let's create a new file. Let's name it context.tsx. All right, and I would say we create a context now so that we can share state between our parent and child component. It's also a nice place to have some state logic in here rather than having the state in the carousel and so on. But you could also pass down the props from the carousel to the carousel item. This would also work. Yeah, it's a little bit up to you, but by using this context here, we make sure that our components don't get too bloated. This is the reason for this. Let's create an interface here in our context and let's name it carousel settings. And in here we will have a width of type number, a height of type number, a rotation, which is an array of numbers. Yeah, a 3-dimensional array of numbers. Then we have the same for the position. We have an item gap, which is of type number. And then also we have two Boolean flags, enable parallax, which is of type Boolean, and enable floating, which is also of type Boolean. And let me explain to you what this is. Yeah, you see we have some rotation here and a specific position. And then also we have this item gap here, which we can control via dat.GUI. And then we have this floating effect. Yeah, it floats up and down. We can disable it. So now you see there's no more floating. And we have this parallax effect. So the currently centered image zooms in a bit. You see the texture. Yeah, this is a cool effect and we can disable it. Now let's create another interface here in our context. Interface, carousel context type. This is a shape of the state that we want to share between our components. All right. So in here, we want to have an active index, which is of type number. We want to have a setter, set active index, which is of type React dispatch, and then React set state action of type number or null. Then we have a settings object here, which is of type carousel settings. We have an is active flag, which is of type Boolean. And then also here we can put our toggle functions in here. Parallax, yeah, which is simply an error function which returns nothing. And same for floating. All right, now let's create our carousel context. Carousel context, which is equal to create context from React. We provide our carousel context type or null, like so. Let's create a hook. Export const use carousel is equal to an error function. And in here, we create a context variable, which is equal to use context. And we pass in our carousel context. And use context you have to import from React as well. If we don't have any context, let's throw an error. And for the case that we have a context, let's return the context. Like so. Beautiful. Now let's create our carousel provider. And this is pretty easy now because we have specified everything. We know what we want to return and so on. So let's say const carousel provider colon react.fc for functional component, angle bracket, curly bracket. In here, let's say children of type React node from React. And then let's make sure that we close the curly bracket and angle bracket. Then let's get the children in here. And now let's create a state. Yeah, active index and set active index, which is null by default. Let's make sure that we bring in your state. And in our case, the active index is the state of the object that is being clicked on. Yeah, so this would be the active index of 2 right now. Yeah, so this is that. Then also let's create const square brackets settings and set settings, which is of type carousel settings. Let me close it, curly bracket parentheses. And in here, we want to have a width with the value of plain settings. Yeah, we have to bring it in from our settings file. Plain settings dot width. Then also a height, plain settings dot height. Rotation, plain settings. Oops, sorry, I'm wrong. Here we have to say group rotation default, comma, position, group position default, item gap. Yeah, make sure to import all these from settings. Then also enable floating by default. Yeah, let's make it true and enable parallax true as well. And here let's define is active, which is equal to active index is not equal to null. So whenever we have a value that is not null, 1, 2, 3, 4, then we know is active is true. All right, now let's have a function const toggle parallax. And this is a simple function which modifies our state. Yeah, we simply leave the state as it is. Yeah, we spread in all the previous values, but then we simply mutate the state of enable parallax and we make it the opposite of what it is currently. So if it's true, it will be false. And then we do the similar thing for toggle floating accordingly. So here we have enable floating instead of enable parallax. Okay, now this is not really important, but let's do that as well. Let's make use of that GUI. So we have some control in here, and using that GUI is a bit complicated in React because in development mode, use effect always runs twice. So we would create multiple instances of an GUI. Yeah, so we would render multiply of these here, and we do not want this, so we have to use some little tricks, but it's not really complicated. Let's create a variable, let GUI colon dat.GUI or null is equal to null. Then let's create a function init GUI is equal to async arrow function. So in here let's say const dat is equal to await import dat.GUI. If we already have an instance of GUI, then simply do nothing and return. Otherwise, let's say GUI is equal to new dat.GUI, like so. Now let's create a settings folder, which is this thing here, settings folder, which is equal to GUI add folder, and we name it carousel settings. Now let's make sure that we can modify the width and height. So we say settings folder add, we pass in our settings, and here we want to mutate the width. Then we can pass in some min and max values. Let's say 0.5, 10, and we want to do it in small steps, maybe 0.1. Let's give it a name of item width, for example, and then let's define what shall happen on change. Here we get the new value. In here we have access to the previous state. So in set settings we can run an arrow function. Here we have access to previous state. Let's spread in the previous state, and we only want to change the width. So we overwrite it and we pass in the value here. Yeah, we can also name it new value, so it's a bit clearer to you. And now let's do a similar thing for the height. We pass in settings, and what we want to add is the height. And that's a similar thing as the stuff below. Oops, and are we not able to chain this? Maybe not. So what we need to do is we grab our settings folder, like so, and then add and so on. Okay. Now we can do a similar thing for the rotation. Again, we can say settings folder dot add. Then we say settings dot rotation, for example. We name it rotation X. And I think it doesn't matter if you say settings dot rotation or settings, comma, and then in quotation marks height, for example. Yeah, it's the same thing. Okay, now let's do dot on change. We get access to the new value. Now in here, it's a bit different. We need to call set settings, as before. We get access to the previous state, and then we spread in the previous state. So far, so good. But now it's a bit different here for the rotation, because it's a 3-dimensional array. Since we are mutating the x value, we need to pass in the new value here in the first position of the array, because it's the x value that we are changing. And then the rest is equal to pref.rotation. Then we need to access the second item in the array, so 1, comma, and then pref.rotation and the third item, which is the Z coordinate, so to speak. And then very similar, we need to do it for the Y value and so on. So I go a bit quicker over this. But now we are changing the middle value, which represents the Y coordinate, yeah, in our array. And we keep the previous state of the other one. And then very similar, the Z value, but here we are mutating the last value of the array. Okay, now let's do the item gap. Settings folder dot add, and then settings item gap. Yeah, maybe let's go from 0 to 6 or so. Steps in 1 point. Steps as big as 0.1. Name is item gap, and then on change, yeah, we keep the previous state, but we are overwriting the item gap property here, yeah, and we pass in the new value. And now we can do our two last ones here, parallax, yeah. And here we simply pass in our toggle parallax because we have defined it as function, yeah. You could also define these as functions as well here, but everything is possible and you can do it however you like it. Let's do the similar thing for floating here, like so, beautiful. And then let's make sure by default our folder is open. So when hitting refresh here, you see it's already open. We can achieve this by writing settings folder dot open. Currently, we don't see anything. This makes sense. Let's make sure that we are making use of use effect like so. Let's bring it in. And we only want to run it once, but in development mode, we will always run it twice. This is how React works in development mode. And in here, let's call init GUI, like so. And then for the case of unmounting, let's do GUI destroy. I think this is important for avoiding memory leaks and stuff like this. We still don't see anything, and the reason is we haven't used our context yet. We will use it in a bit, but let's write some more code before we do that. Let's make use of use effect again, and we want to run this use effect whenever its active is changing or active index, yeah? Okay. And in here, let's do set settings again. Let's run our arrow function in set settings. Let's spread in all the previous state, but then let's change the rotation. So here, let's say rotation. For the case that it's active, let's do group rotation active. Otherwise, group rotation default, like so. And then we want to do a similar thing for the position. So here, let's do group position default. And now let's fix this here, wrong order of the brackets. And now finally we need to return something here from our carousel provider. Let's do return parentheses, and let's say angle bracket carousel context dot provider. What values do we want to provide to our components? The following here: settings, active index, set active index, then is active, and then also our two toggle functions. And now in here, let's put in our children, like so. All right, so far so good. Now let's make use of our context. Let's go back to our carousel, and in here, let's get rid of this import statement. Let's say export const wrap carousel, and in here we return carousel provider, which we bring in from context. And then in here we pass in our carousel like so. Now let's grab this wrap carousel. Yeah, let's copy it. Let's go to our page. And in here, let's make use of our wrap carousel like so. And now you see we already have our GUI interface here, but we still see one item. Okay. And actually, I'm not really sure why we have this TypeScript error here. Because we shouldn't have it, or? Because this looks clean to me. Ah, sorry. This must be number or null, like so. Yeah, this is important that you fix this. And now the error is gone. Nice. Let's close context. Let's go to carousel again. And now we can access this settings object here. And we can access it by using our custom hook use carousel from context. And here we get access to settings, like so. Let's keep going in our use frame hook. Here we need to add settings.itemGap, like so. And let's put that in parentheses, like so. Yeah, we can also modify the Z value a bit. We can say -mass apps, yeah, based on the distance, and multiply it by 0.5 maybe, for example. Then also let's calculate the scale value, which is equal to distance. For the case that the distance is 0, we want to scale our item with a factor of 2, otherwise 0.7 maybe or so that the centered item, that this item is scaled up and the other ones are scaled down, so to speak, yeah? Alrighty, let's make it that we always just see 3 items. So we can say item.visible is equal to mass.apps. We pass in the distance and let's say smaller equal 2, so that we always see 3 items here. One more thing, for the case that one item is active, we only want to see one item here. Yeah, so this is why we do the following. If active index is not equal to null, then item.visible is equal to active index triple equal index. And of course, we need to get access to active index, which we can bring in via our hook here, use carousel. Let's do active index here. Yep. And now let's make sure that we see a few more objects here. So now let's do GSAP 2. We want to modify the position of the item, comma, curly brackets. And now in here, let's say x value shall be 0. We don't want to do anything with the x value. The y value shall be y. That value shall be z. Let's give it a duration of 2 seconds. And let's give it an easing function of power 3.out, for example. And now let's get rid of the second parentheses. And let's properly close it like this. And we still don't see anything. And the reason for this is that we have our root group ref here, but we actually haven't applied it to our group tag here. Yeah? So this is why we don't have any items. So we have nothing to loop over. And this is why we don't see more items. So let's apply it, ref, curly brackets, and let's pass it in like so. And now we already see them here, but yeah, the item gap is a bit large, I think. You see when hit refresh, there are already some items, but yeah, the item gap is too large. We will be working on it. But next I would say, let's make sure that we are able to scroll via our mouse wheel so that we are able to see multiple items here. So above useFrame, let's create const handle wheel, which is an arrow function which gets access to the wheel event. And in here, first of all, if active index is not null, then we want to return. Yeah, we don't want to be able to scroll when we are in this state here, yeah. So then should be scrolling disabled. Otherwise, let's say const delta is equal to e.delta y times 0.5. Yeah, this is just a fitting value that I've figured out. Then let's create a variable, new progress. Oops. New progress is equal to progress ref.current plus delta. Then let's say new progress is equal to mass.round, and we pass in new progress. And this just makes sure that we have a snappy experience, yeah, so that the scrolling behavior is like this. Otherwise, it would be not that nice. Let's further manipulate new progress. Let's say mass.max null, mass.min 100, new progress like this. And what these two lines are doing is snap progress to the nearest item, yeah, and then it clamps it so that progress is always between 0 and 100. And then at the end, let's say progress.ref.current is equal to new progress. All right, and now let's use a little trick that works nicely for our carousel. We are already in a group tag here, so we can create another mesh. In that mesh, let's have a plain geometry with the width and height of viewport width and viewport height. Let's have a mesh basic material, but without any color. Let's make it transparent, and let's give it an opacity of 0, like so. And now you might be asking, yeah, why do we need this thing if we don't see it? We simply need it to keep track of our progress. So here on this mesh, let's say on wheel, and we pass in our handle wheel, like so. Also, we need to give it a position, and everything is 0 except the Z coordinate. Let's make it -0.01. And now what you see is we are able to scroll. As I just have noticed, nothing is really working here. And the reason is I messed up the structure a bit. So we need to have two groups here, yeah? This outer group is correct, but we need to grab this ref here, and let's create another group here, and let's put this ref on this group. And then let's make sure that this group wraps around all of our items here, like so, yeah? So we get all the items here properly. Otherwise, this will not be working. But now everything works nicely, as you can see here. It works buttery smooth. The item gap is working, but the rest is not working. So we need to fix that. And the reason why this is not working is because in our carousel item, we need to make sure that we access the width and height of the item and that we apply it to our plain geometry. This is very important. So in our carousel item, let's say const. Let's get the settings from our use carousel hook, like so. Let's get the width and height destructured from our settings object. We actually don't need rotation and position. And now we can say arcs is equal to curly brackets, square brackets, settings dot width, comma, settings dot height, like so. Beautiful. And now we see that they are pretty large, but that's okay. We can change the item gap, and we can change everything else. No, we can't change the item height, huh? The width is working, but the item height is not working. Why is that? Interesting. So let's go to our context and let's see. Of course, here I forgot to use onChange, and we actually need to update our previous state here, yeah? And now this should be working. Now we are able to update the height, perfect, and also the item gap. What we also can do is, let's go back to our carousel item, and let's provide a position here. Let's make it -10 for the Z coordinate. And what you see now, we are further away and they are smaller. So now we have a nice overview here. And now let's go back to carousel. Here you see we are using item.visible, yeah? And then also we calculate a value here for visible, yeah, a boolean, and we make it dependent on the distance. And here we, for example, can say smaller equal 1. So now we always see 3 items, and now we see more items. Yeah, so we always see 2 items that are not in the center, and now just 1. All right, so far so good. Everything is working nicely. Now, let's go back to our carousel item here, yeah? And in here, it looks pretty boring. We do not do anything special. We just see these red objects here that are super boring. So now let's do the following here. Let's say const shader arcs is equal to, and now let's make use of useMemo. In useMemo, we pass in an arrow function, and in here, let's do const uniforms. Yeah, these will be passed to our shaders soon. Currently, it's not very important, so let's make them an empty object. And now let's create our shaders. We need a vertex shader, and after the equal sign, we can do a comment. We can say GSL, and now we get nice colors in here, and not everything is just colored orange. Yeah, so this is why we use this comment here. And for now, in our vertex shader, let's say varying vec2 VOV, like so. And then simply, we don't do anything special here. This is typical boilerplate for the vertex shader. We have by default access to our position that we can use, and we can also directly use the UV. And now in here we can say VUV for varying is equal to UV. And by using this varying keyword here, we can now create our fragment shader. We get access to this varying VOV, but we also need to specify it here. And then what we can do is, we also need to have a void function. And in here we can say glFragColor, like so. Let's make sure that we close everything properly. And then here in useMemo, we need to have a return statement. And let's return the uniforms, the vertex shader, and the fragment shader, like so. And why do I have an arrow here? Of course, we need a dependency array. For now, it's empty. Now let's grab our shader args and pass them to our shader material. So here we simply say args, and we pass in shader args. Or am I right? Sorry, this must be an array. And now let's see, we have red by default here. And now we can manipulate it. For example, let's say 1 here. And yeah, it's already working. We can also use this VUV here. It's a 2-dimensional array. So let's get rid of 2 of them here, comma. And you see, we get this coloring here. VUV goes from 0 to 1 in the X direction and also in the Y direction. Yeah, from 0 to 1. This means red is 0 here, max red becomes maximal red here, yeah? And the same is for green, yeah? RGB, so G, yeah, becomes maximal green here at the top. So this is basically hello world in GLSL. This is a programming language that we are using here. But now, let's make it more interesting. Let's use our texture here. So, in uniforms, let's say uText for uniforms is equal to, and then curly brackets, value. Always write this value and then put in the texture. Yeah? You always need this value, otherwise you get problems. Let's go to our fragment shader. The fragment shader is always responsible for coloring the surface of our object. Yeah? And in here we want to use uText, and this is a uniform. Yeah, because we pass it from uniforms down to our fragment shader. And this is a special type, sampler 2D, because it's a texture. Let's do vec3 text color is equal to, and here we need to use a function provided by GLSL, texture 2D, and we pass in the uText, and we also need the VOV, and then we only want RGB. We don't want the A value, which is the opacity. Let's grab this thing and let's put it in here. And the last value here is for the opacity. And now you see we have our textures ready here. So far, so good. Now I would say, let's do the following here. Let's make use of another uniform, gray overlay, colon, curly brackets, value. And there are many opportunities of how to do it, but here by default we have to initialize it. It shall be a 4-dimensional array, so we say 3.vector4, and by default we pass in null. Yeah, so it basically does nothing because the opacity is 0, so to speak. And don't forget the new keyword here. Okay. Now let's grab this here, let's copy it. Let's go to our fragment shader because we want to manipulate the color. Yeah? And the vertex shader is responsible for manipulating the vertices. These are the points of the object in 3D space. And also we can manipulate the position of the UV coordinates, which are responsible for displaying our texture on the surface of the object. And what you need to know is that these shaders, the vertex shader and the fragment shader, run in parallel, meaning they run for every vertex and for every fragment being every pixel, yeah, in parallel. So this is super efficient, and this is the beauty of using shaders, because they run on the GPU, and our GPUs are super strong and they can handle a lot of vertices and pixels in parallel, yeah. So this is why we use shaders, because it's super efficient and you can do a lot of cool things. All right, now let's go back to our fragment shader, and in here let's pass in uniform vec for hue gray overlay. And now let's manipulate the text color. Based on our gray overlay, we can say mix. It's also an inbuilt function. We can pass in our text color and also our hue gray overlay .rgb. Yeah, we are mixing two colors, so we need RGB just, yeah. And then we want to mix them based on the opacity of hue gray overlay. And now we get an error. Why is it? Okay, I named it text color. So let's get rid of this key. Let's hit refresh. And I still get an error. Why do I get it? Oh, sorry, of course. I totally messed it up. Text color, and down below here in GL frag color also text color, like so. And currently we do not see any effect on our textures, but that's expected. All right, so since we are here, let's do some more work here on the uniforms object here. So let's make sure that we are passing down all the important uniforms to our shader. So let's say time, colon, curly brackets, by default it's 0. Let's pass down the scroll speed. By default it's also 0. Let's pass down the hue distance, also 0 by default. Hue progress, also 0 by default. Let's pass down hue enable parallax, which is equal to whatever it is defined in our settings, which is true by default, yeah. Let's do a similar thing for floating. And then let's also have a hue zoom scale. And in here we will have a value for X. And here we need to use the viewport. So let's bring it in. Const viewport, which is equal to use 3. Like so. Use 3 from React 3 Fiber. And now we can say here viewport.width divided by width, and for the y value we say viewport.height divided by height. And I need to get rid of one colon here, like so. And this zoom scale will be used in order to create this nice zoom effect here. As you can see, yeah, the image here, the texture, the object gets bigger, yeah, and this is because of the zoom effect. And then let's also pass down hue is active. By default it's false. All right, so far so good. Now let's work on this gray overlay effect here. So let's go back to our carousel. And now maybe underneath this GSAP 2, let's get access to the material of each of our items. We can do that by item.children at the 0 position. And here we get an arrow. And this is because let's put this thing here, item.children 0 in parentheses. And let's say this shall be of type 3.mesh, like so. And then the material is of type 3.shaderMaterial. And now what this allows us is to pass down values for our uniforms, yeah, from our JavaScript code down to our shaders which run on our GPU. So here we say GSAP, and we say animate hue gray overlay. And I simply love these comments because I tell Copilot exactly what it needs to be doing. And you see it's pretty smart, but it fails a bit. Let's do the following. Let's say X is 0.7, Y is 0.7, and Z. So RGB. And then we have a W value, which is our opacity. And here now, for our opacity, we want to make it dependent on our distance. For the case that the distance is 0, then we want to have a value of 0, otherwise of 0.7 maybe or so, comma. And now you already see it's working. So for this item in the center here, the distance is 0. We have now gray overlay. And the reason is because we specified an opacity of 0 here, yeah? So in our shader here, since we are making it dependent on the opacity of the gray overlay uniform here, yeah, we only weigh in the text color here, yeah, and we basically completely ignoring the gray color here. So this is why we have this nice effect here. Now let's go back to our carousel, and let's also down below our GSAP 2 function here where we manipulate the position, let's manipulate the scale of the item. And we simply pass in the values for the scale here, and we say item.scale. And let's see if this is working. Currently it's not working. Or maybe it's working, but the difference is too tiny. Let's make it like 2.5. And it seems to be working. I think so, huh? You'll see this one gets bigger. Beautiful. Now, let's keep going. We are almost done. Now, let's pass down a few other things. Let's pass down the distance. Distance. Yeah, as you can see, this works out similarly. But here, let's say, for the value, mass.apps, mass.apps, we pass in the distance. For the case that it's bigger than 0, we want to make it 1, otherwise 0. Yeah, so it's always between 1 and 0. And what else do we need? Let's also make sure that we pass down the time. We don't need to animate it, so we can say material uniforms, and then use scroll speed dot value, and we pass in our scroll speed. Now let's go back to our carousel item and let's keep working on our shaders to make it look really beautiful and amazing. So back to our vertex shader. Let's specify a few more uniforms, maybe underneath our varying here. Let's have uniform float time, uniform float scroll speed, uniform float distance. Oops, and let me format it nicely. It's a bit messed up here. Let's get a uniform vec2 zoom scale, a uniform float progress, uniform bool. Oops, what did I do? Holy moly. Uniform bool is active. And then our two other booleans, uniform bool enable parallax and uniform bool enable floating. And make sure everything that you're using here is specified in here, yeah? So this is very important. Otherwise, it will not be working. Also, let's specify a float named pi, and we give it this value here, yeah? It's pi value. Let's make sure that they are floating nicely. How can we do that? That's a big question. First of all, let's specify vec3. Pos is equal to position. By default, we have access to the position of every single vertex in our vertex shader. And we simply name it pos, so we don't have to write position. Now, for the case that u is active is not true, u is active and u enable floating. Yeah, for the case that this is true, then we want to manipulate the y position of each of our vertices. And what we want to do is we want to add a tiny amount, and we want to make it behave like a wave, going up and down. And here we can use a sinus function, a sine function. Yeah, that allows us to create this effect of going up and down. We can pass in pi, and we can say times u time, yeah? Because over time, the sinus has always the same values, yeah? It goes up and down like a wave. And then we can provide a semicolon here, like so. Let's go back to our project here. And currently it's not working. Let's hit refresh. All right, currently this is here not working. And the reason might be that uTime is 0, so that we are not updating it. So let's go back to our carousel. And of course it's 0 because we haven't passed it down. So material.uniforms.uTime.value. And then here we say performance.now divided by 1000. And now you see we have this nice floating effect, but it's a bit strong. So we can simplify, we can multiply it by 0.1, for example. Yeah. So we have this smooth effect. And you could even make it that you can control it via that GUI here. Yeah, this value. So you can control the strength of the floating effect. But it's too much code. You can try it. It's not very difficult. Yeah, you should already know how to do that. All right, now we have our floating effect. Now what we want to create a nice deformity effect based on our scroll direction and our scroll speed. How can we do that? We are already passing down the scroll speed, so we can use it. Let's manipulate the y position of each of our vertices. So position y again, plus equal sine ty times, and here we can say, for example, vuv, pi times vuv x, and then times scroll speed. So this should manipulate the y position of each of our vertices. So it should add a bit to our y value of each of our vertices. And currently this is not really working here. Currently we are not getting any deformity, I think. Let's do the same for our z coordinate. Or I should say similar thing. Here, for example, we can use the cosine. And here we do vuv.y, for example. And you see something here, but it looks really bad. You see some kind of glitch. And the reason is, let's go back to our carousel. Let's animate this. Yeah, let's animate use scroll speed. GSAP 2 and do it like this. Yeah, duration of 2 seconds. And now you see that we have some kind of deformity here. Let's go back to our carousel item. Maybe let's make them larger. Let's see. Let's make it stronger by a factor of 10. Does this change anything? I'm not really happy with this effect because it should change it a bit so that we have a nice curve for the y values here, yeah? So this should be more curvy, but why don't we get it? I don't understand. I think I know why we don't see it. What we need to do is, we are fine here, but we need to go down. And here we need to specify the subdivisions. Let's say 30 and 30, yeah? Because now you see what's happening. Now we have a nice effect here, because we have many subdivisions. This is the deformity effect I'm talking about, yeah? I think it looks pretty cool. Now, for the case that we have enabled parallax, if you enabled, let me copy this thing, you enable parallax, then let's do the following. And in order for this to work, we need to do like 3 steps. It's a bit complicated, but let's do it. So first of all, let's manipulate vuv, which is equal to uv minus vec2 0.5, like so. Then we have to multiply it by, for example, 0.6, and then plus vec2 0.5. What are we doing here? Oh, sorry, this must be vec2, and of course this must be also vec2. So what are we doing here? We want to manipulate the UV coordinates, yeah, meaning we want to have this nice zoom in and zoom out effect of our texture here. Yeah, and this is a bit complicated. We want to do it symmetrically. Yeah, so you see it's pretty symmetrically. And why we need this line, I will explain in a bit. But first of all, let's keep going. Let's do vec2 offset is equal to vuv minus vec2 0.5, like so. And then let's do vuv plus equal offset times u distance, like so. Now let's go back to our thing here. And currently it's not working, or? Currently the Parallax effect is not working. So let's go back to our carousel. Let's see what we are doing here. We are passing down the distance. So this looks correct. If distance is higher than 0, we pass down 1, otherwise 0. So why is it? Let's make this deformity effect a bit weaker so we can easily see whether our parallax effect is working. So let's say times 0.1. Same for the thing above, below. Speed with 1D. It's not working correctly, huh? Sorry, of course. Here, this must be VUV, like so. It's not working at all. And of course, it's not working because... no, we are already using it here. But we need to provide some dependencies, I think, yeah? So let's pass in texture, settings, yeah, our whole settings object, like so. And now it's working, yeah? We can disable floating. And we can disable our parallax, yeah? Look, it's enabled, how it looks like. Let's disable it. It's still not working, I think. It's still not working properly. Interesting. So let's go to our vertex shader. View distance, everything looks correct. Do we animate the distance here? Yes, we do. And you know what? I found the mistake. A dumb mistake. You see, we have U distance here in our use frame. U distance dot value and then again value here. This is totally wrong. Let's get rid of one dot value here. And now it's properly working. Beautiful parallax effect. And how does this work now? Let's go back to our carousel item. Let me get rid of this line here. And let's see what's happening. You see, we get a super bad distortion here, yeah? Of our texture, which looks really bad here. And to avoid this, we need this line. And we actually can put this offset above this line here. And then use offset here, yeah? So it's a bit cleaner. So what are we doing here? We are creating an offset which allows to scale from the center, you could say. And here we are applying this offset. We make sure that we scale from the center. And now we need to add this again because we have subtracted it before. Yeah. If we don't add this again, I can show it to you what happens then. You see it's not centered anymore. Yeah. And if we get rid of both of these, you'll see how this works. Yeah. We need this to make sure that we scale from the center, yeah, so it's symmetrically. It's a bit hard to explain, but you simply can try it out yourself and fiddle around with these values and you'll see how this works. All right, beautiful. We are still not done. Now we still need to create this cool effect here, yeah? This beautiful effect. And for this, we need to use this zoom scale uniform. So let's do that now. Let's do that in our vertex shader as well, because we want to manipulate the positions. All right, so animation for active. And here, let's say float angle. Let's create an angle, which is equal to u progress times pi divided by 2, for example. Let's create a wave, which is equal to cosine of this angle. Let's create a float c, which is equal to sine. And in here, let's say length. Length is also an inbuilt function. Let's pass in VUV minus vec 2.5. Again, we do this offset thing here to make sure that it's nicely centered and symmetrically. Yeah, this is what we want to achieve by this offset here. And then we can multiply it times 15 for the strength. And then let's say plus u progress times 12. Always make sure that you have this dot here. This is important. Otherwise, you will get errors. Oops, and I made a mistake. We need to close the parentheses here. And let's get rid of this yellow one here, like so. And then let's say times 0.5 plus 0.5. And now let's manipulate our pulse x by saying times equal, and then let's do a mix, 1.0, comma, u zoom scale of x plus wave times c, and then comma, u progress. And let's do the same thing for pos y. And just because I see it now here, you see we have this distortion here still, yeah? So what we can do here is to make this value after u distance, yeah, a little bit smaller, 0.3 for example. So now we got rid of this distortion here. Now we have this code in place for the wave, but currently nothing happens when clicking on an item. And the reason for this is that we need some further logic in this component here. So in our component, let's access that active index and active index. Then let's create a state here. Let's say is active and set is active. By default, it's false. Then below, let's create a use effect. And by the way, we could also do that in our context. But now I'm doing it here. You see it becomes already a bit bloated, but yeah, anyway, let's do it here. And now here in our use effect, let's do the following. Set is active. Yeah, it's a boolean. And here we say for the case that active index is triple equal index is active is true. Yeah. Okay. And then let's say if active index is equal to index, then let's say set is close. Oh, we also need to create this one. Here, let's say is close active, comma, set is close active. Also use state. And then here for the case that active index is triple equal to index, let's say set is close active to false. Otherwise, we set it to true. And we want to make it dependent on active index. Like so. Now let's go down. Let's go to our group here. And here we can say on click, let's run an arrow function here. Let's say if is active, then we want to set active index to null. Let's set active index to index. And now let's try it out. Let's click on one item. Okay, it's partly working. So the items are disappearing, but the rest is not working. And the reason might be that we are not passing down u progress, which we need for this kind of animation here, yeah? We need u progress here, yeah? So let's go back to our carousel and let's pass it down. So let's do GSAP u progress. Yeah, you know the drill. And all right, this is not what we want, right? Ah, I know. You know, the problem is we do not want to do it every frame. Yeah, we don't want to do it in use frame. We want to do it in here, and we want to do it in another use effect. Use effect. Ah, sorry, we don't need to do it in use effect. We can do it in our use memo. Let's bring in GSAP, and then above uniforms, maybe we can say GSAP. Let's write a comment. Animate new progress based on is active, yeah? And sorry, we need to do it below uniforms, like so, yeah? So when it's active, the progress is 1, otherwise it's 0. And now let's see what's happening. It's still not working. Why is it not working? Maybe we need to provide it's active here, the dependency array of useMemo. And now it's partly working. Yep. It's partly working. We get this nice wavy effect. We get this nice wave effect. All right. But also, as seen here, we want to animate the position and rotation. So let's do that next. So let's go back to our carousel and maybe here down below. Let's do const tl is equal to gsap.timeline, like so. Like so. And now we can chain multiply animations. But before we do that, let's create a few variables. HTML overlay left is equal to active index is not equal to null. Then we want to have a position of left minus 40 VW. Otherwise, we want to have minus 100. And then also let's create another one, HTML overlay opacity, which is 1 for the case that we have an active index. Yeah. And why do we need these things? We need them because we want to show some HTML here. Yeah. And you see we let it slide in, and also we animate the opacity. This is what we want to do here. But now let's create some HTML so we are able to see something. For that, let's put everything in a fragment. And then here below this opening fragment tag, let's have HTML. Let's import it from React 3 Drive. This allows us to write HTML in our canvas component. And then in here, let's have a div. This div has a ref, HTML overlay ref. Oh, we haven't created it, so let's create it. There it is. And then also this overlay here needs some classes. It needs absolute vet minus 100, top minus 0, left minus 0, W full, and opacity 0 by default. Oh, maybe we don't need it here. And then let's say style is equal to double curly brackets, transform, and then in here we say translate x minus 100W and opacity 0, like so. And then in here, it doesn't really matter. You feel free to put in whatever you like, but I just grab some HTML here and put it in our outer div here. Yeah, so, but make sure this is position relative, and then you are free to put in whatever you like. Oops, this is the wrong one. And yeah, currently you don't see anything because of this here. Let's get rid of style and we should see something, yeah? But currently it's not animated. Let's work on this. Below HTML overlay opacity, let's say if we do not have a root group ref.current, then we return. Otherwise, let's do some animations. Timeline 2. Let's animate our root group ref, and we want to animate the rotation property. And then we say x colon settings dot rotation at position 0. We do a similar thing for y and z. Yeah, but make sure it's 0, 1, 2. Duration maybe 0.8. Yeah, we provide an easing function. Now we have the rotation. Yeah, it's already working. All right. And now let's do a similar thing for the position. Yeah, but here we are using the position from settings. Beautiful. And now let's do a last animation. And here we want to animate our HTML overlay ref.current. And what do we want to animate? Here we want to animate x, which is equal to HTML overlay left, and the opacity. Yeah, these two that we defined above. Nice. All right, and it's kind of working, but it only works for the outer ones here. No? It doesn't work for the middle one. We have to figure out why that is. And we can also do one more thing here. We can say, comma, then we say here, at the last two function here, we can provide another argument. We can say smaller minus 0.3. And what this does, while this last thing here is still animating, 0.3 seconds before this finishes, this one starts, yeah? So we have a little overlap here, like so. And currently it's a bit messed up here because our window is pretty small. And also we want to be able to click on the middle one. Why is this not working? Why? We have to figure that out. All right, let's go to item gap and let's make sure we can increase the item gap up to 10. And now let's see how that looks. Let's increase the items a bit. Yeah, and you can experiment with the animation here. So now we have one more issue here. When clicking on an item, it doesn't work. Yeah? It only works when I click at a specific position, maybe there, but it works really badly. Yeah. So when I click in the middle, it doesn't work at all. And why is it? It took me some time to figure out. The problem is our HTML overlay. I made a typo here. This must be absolute. And now it works perfectly. Because without the absolute keyword, the HTML would be on top of our canvas. And so I would be not able to click. Yeah. So this is why. And now it works pretty all right. But one more thing. I saw here in our context where we use our use effect to change our rotation and position based on is active and active index here under position. For the case that it is active, of course, I want to use group position active, and otherwise I want to use the default value. And now let me hit refresh. It should work nicely. It changes the position on active and also the rotation, right? And you can experiment with it. Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I see you soon in another big tutorial. Thank you and bye for now.